Good evening. Oh, all this chit-chat. Everybody's happy to be here, I hope. Welcome to our inaugural meeting of this is a joint meeting, but the inaugural meeting of the General Plan Advisory Committee. There are a lot of, to me, familiar faces, but also some brand new faces, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you. I'm Nancy Gardner. I'm the chair of the General Plan Update Steering Committee. My fellow members, Kimberly and Philip, right here. And staff will be explaining in more detail our relationship, but our role is exactly what it says. We sort of steer. You guys do the big work. You do the thinking and the creating and create the actual plan. We're going to start with a roll call, and afterwards we'll ask you all to identify. No, we won't. It'll take a while before we all get to know each other, but all right, are we ready?
Yes. Okay, I will now take a roll call vote for the record. Please respond when I call your name. I apologize in advance if I mispronounce any of your guys' names.
And would you raise your hand so we can start to get to know you?
Okay. Dennis Baker.
Okay, Dennis is not here tonight, okay. He's been under the weather.
Okay.
We here.
Curtis Black. Here. James Carlson. Here. Annie Cloherty. Corinne Dowdy. Here. Arlene Greer. Here. David Guter. Here. Lynn Hackman. Here.
Oh, there's Dennis, okay.
Dennis is now present. Laird Hayes. Here. Charles Klob. Here. Ruth Kobayashi. Here. Dennis Labong. Here. Jonathan Langford. Here. Katie Love. Here. Tony Maniscalchi. Here. Thomas Meng. Here. Jem Mosher. Here. Maxwell Pearson. Here. Nancy Scarborough. Here. Amber Snyder. Here. Debbie Stevens. Here. Graham Wahlberg. Not here. Paul Watkins. Here. Lori Williams. Here. Christy Walker. Here. Robert Rader. Here. We have, for the record, Jeff Cefalia, Jeremy Evans, and Laurel Tippett are excused this evening.
That's a great turnout. I was the co-chair of the previous general plan, our current general plan, and I have a couple of thoughts for you as you enter this role that you're going to play. The first is eat before you come. Very practical advice, but if you think the meeting's going to last an hour, it'll run 3, and blood sugar will be down, you'll be getting very cranky. The second is that our current general plan, if you look at it, is very much a plan of the 20th century. And we are now well into the 21st century. And things that we only touched on or even ignored are now really issues we have to deal with. And I urge you to be bold, to really be creative and really be thinking in terms of the future. Yes, we have a lot of things that you're going to want to deal with that affect your neighborhood or whatever, but really when you look at the overall picture, remember this is at least 20 years that you're plotting and planning for the city. So be bold. And finally, have fun. I really enjoyed, and our process took 4 years, but I really enjoyed it. I learned so much about the city. I thought I knew everything about the city. I learned so much. But I also learned beyond the city because we have experts coming in, and you will learn things that you didn't think you were even interested in, but find the part of the process. Staff tonight is going to take us through what a general plan is for those of you who have not been involved in one before. And just to clarify, staff's role is not to create the plan. And staff's role is to facilitate and assist you when you need information, when we need guidance. But the plan, remember, is yours. You are the ones creating it. So I look forward to what you produce.
I'm Campbell. I'm the Deputy Community Development Director for the City of Newport Beach. we'll be guiding you through tonight. We've got a presentation that we're going to get into. Myself and Ben will go through that. But I think we have a couple of items on the agenda here as a joint agenda that we need to kind of get through. The first is public comments on non-agenda items. And so is there any public comments on non-agenda items?
Can I ask from here, or you want me to come up there?
Yeah, come on up. Here, you can even talk.
Sure. So Charles Globe, I noticed that you're recording. Is there going to be any discussion tonight about the recording being available, or whether this will be live cast like the council or the planning commission? We've had some comments from folks at home that they'd like to be able to participate just by watching, ideally live, but at the very least on recording. Thank you.
This evening and kind of get a group consensus as to how we might want to proceed with that. So that's good. Any other non-agenda items? Or, I'm sorry, public comments on non-agenda items. Osier.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. This is a comment for the steering committee, because reading your minutes from the last meeting, I noticed that at that meeting you heard a presentation about the preparation of a community plan for the airport area, and at the end of the minutes, you asked for an update about it at your next meeting. I do not see that on the agenda. So if you're not aware of what happened, I wanted to let you know that at the November 29th City Council meeting, the council voted on what they called an A1 item to put something on a future agenda. And that A1 item was to direct staff to work with the Airport Village Community Plan Group to develop a memorandum of understanding for a community plan for the airport area. That direction was unanimously given, with the exception of Councilmember O'Neill, who recused himself. However, this was over the objection of one airport area property owner who did not feel there was any equitable way that 37% of the property owners could specify how the remaining 67% their land should be used. And it was ambiguous both to him and to me whether the motion was to actually direct staff to prepare an MOU or to put that on a future agenda for the council to discuss whether they should pursue it. And that is the purpose of my comment. You might want clarity as to how the staff interprets that action that the council took. Are they actually currently working on an MOU, or is the council at a future meeting going to vote on whether they want the staff to spend the time doing that? Thank you.
Comments on non-agenda items?
Hi. How are you? My name is Adriana Forche, and I think Jim Mosier, because I was actually going to bring that up. I was not at the last meeting, but I did read the agenda, the minutes of it, and I did note the exact same thing about this a second group called Airport Village Community Plan Group, which is a private group, consists of 3 members, and they're claiming they represent about 37% of the landowners in the airport area. And I know we're here for the general plan, but I'm just going to speak briefly about that. I actually am a business owner in the airport area, and our business is located in a gated community called Cole Center Newport. Cole Center Newport is in the airport area, of course. And like other people who live in gated communities, just to make a parallel, so in your mind you can say it's about the same thing, we purchased our property, and we have common areas. We pay a share of the operating expenses. We all had to sign along the dotted lines that we would follow the CCNRs. We have to get permission when we want to do anything, that kind of thing. Sound familiar? Cole Center Newport has 5 million square feet of office space. There are many, many buildings. Not one company or developer owns all the buildings. It's a diverse group of building owners. And just for the record, Uptown Newport Apartments is not part of Cole Center Newport. That's a separate development. But my point is that when the Airport Village Plan Group comes in and says they want to represent the plan for the airport, I don't know if it's just their property or all the property. I don't think that's really appropriate. And I'm recommending that the advisory committee identifies representatives in the business community who are not primarily developers, and that 2, allow opportunities for stakeholder engagement by actively reaching out to airport area businesses that would be impacted by any community plan. And last comment is it would be improper to allow a self-interested private group undue influence in the planning process, as that could be looked at as self-dealing. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nancy Scarborough. I am working with a group called the Good Neighbors Newport. It's been around for some time, and we have been talking about this same airport community plan and would like to encourage additional input from the community and residents as well as business owners. That's an area of the city that could potentially be a really nice village, and I think that the intentions of the 3 members may be good, but a plan that is developed in a dark room by 3 developers is going to have very little community support, and I think it's very important that more individuals, residents throughout the city, and owners of buildings in that area be involved in that. So, thank you.
No? Okay.
Steering committee. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? So moved by Kim. And a second? All in favor? Thank you. All right, and now for the orientation and jump, huh? Yes. Yes, that's right. Yeah, right, yes. Yes, yeah, all right. All right, all right, now we will have our orientation.
Right, I will start. Working for the city for 23 years, I'd like to think I understand the general plan quite well. I was here when it was created. I was primarily in the current planning division, working current planning, so I was not necessarily directly involved with the creation of the current general plan, although I was consulted at times behind the scenes. So anyway, I've got some pretty good familiarity with that. Committee members. Okay, one of the things I want to start off with is really kind of going over the overall structure of the group that we've got here today. This is a joint meeting between 2 groups, the steering committee, which is the members that you see here. And the steering committee, the General Plan Advisory Committee meeting, the 30 folks who have been appointed for that, basically work on the general plan, and we'll be working on the update for over the next couple of, actually year and a half, 2 years. It might take that long. But the work of the GPAC is steered by the steering committee, and the steering committee then reports to the city council. So we have the 30-person advisory committee, which is indicated that they'll be working on the various different issues, the various different elements of the general plan, and we're going to go over what those elements are in a summary fashion, because we recognize here today that there are some folks in the room who have a very good understanding of the general plan, and then others that really don't. So we want to start from the beginning. So apologize if you really are an expert in the general plan. We're going to be going over some areas that you probably already know, and we do have very good attendance tonight, so that's really, really good. Okay, so introductions. Again, the purpose is to review and guide the goals and to have a forum within which to discuss the various drafts that are going to be putting forward. We're going to be bringing in consultant assistants and staff assistants to kind of go over these different issues and kind of go over what the current general plan says, what it really should say, and that is really policy development with the assistance of staff, with the assistance of the community, and as well as consultants. So that's what the role of the General Plan Advisory Committee really is. So it's a little bit different, and again, it will be steered by the steering committee, and the steering committee will, from time to time, check in with the city council. I guess that's supposed to be every 2 months, I think it is, and so we'll be helping the steering committee prepare progress reports to the city council to check in. And so if there's an initiative that, you know, the committee or the public or the steering committee wants to foster, you know, that's really kind of different and new for the community, we'll do a check-in with city council, make sure they're on board with that, and then we'll go from there. Well, moving ahead, I want to do introductions from city staff. So in the audience here, we have Simone Georges, the Community Development Director. So for those who don't know, the Community Development Department is made up of several divisions: Planning Division, the Building Division, Code Enforcement, and Real Properties. We manage the city's real property assets, and Simone manages all that. I manage the planners, okay? With me here today is Benjamin Zadiba. He's sitting over here at the staff table. He is a principal planner. He will be a project manager on this. I also want to introduce several members of my staff who are here. I want you to know their names because they're going to be helping the GPAC go through the various different elements. And so we have Jaime Murillo in the back. He'll wave out. Jaime's been with the city for 18, 19 years, principal planner. Very well versed in the general plan. Obviously, he's also has been our zoning administrator in the past. So we have Elizabeth Westmoreland, senior planner, and we have Chelsea Crager, senior planner, and we have Makana Nova, senior planner. So later in the evening, we're going to be asking for people's interests in different elements of the general plan. We're going to explain what those elements are in a moment here, and our staff members are going to be assigned those elements, and they're going to be working with, you know, subcommittees and the consultants to help us go through and get familiar with those elements, and then obviously to bring forward the work of amending it. So again, what we're doing here is assisting and facilitating this process. You know, we're not creating it. We may have some suggestions and recommendations if you're interested. You know, we've got a lot of experience in how the general plan works and how, you know, it might be, there's areas to be improved. We kind of know where some of those are, and we'll offer those suggestions to you along the way as well. But in the end, Nancy's correct. I mean, this is the community's plan, so we want it to be your plan. You know, the work that you're going to be doing is going to be eventually coming forward and going into a draft document, and then you'll be making a recommendation that'll go forward to the Planning Commission and the City Council, ultimately, for adoption of a document. Again, technical support. We'll be administering those consultant contracts and, you know, facilitating any other technical discussions that you might have. Nancy and I were talking about maybe bringing in UCI and some of their folks on sea level rise to kind of help the group that's going to be working on that, and that's obviously very near and dear to us. So those working relationships, I touched upon this a little bit already. You know, the GPAC does the kind of the heavy lifting of the document review. Again, it's steered by the steering committee, and then they report into the city council. And so, you know, that is how it works. But along the way, you'll see in the graphic here, we have community input along the way, because as you know, the public's going to be involved in your deliberations. They're going to be involved in the steering committee deliberations because these are all Brown Act meetings. We're inviting the public to these meetings because we want to be transparent in what we're doing. We want to take input along the way. We'll be scheduling, you know, community outreach forums where we're soliciting additional input along the way on different aspects of it. And so, again, that community input box is very important. And clearly the council takes community input at every meeting. So you can expect to see that. And city staff will be supporting all three groups along the way. So, you know, this is kind of an interesting graph. You know, what does the general plan mean? You know, a variety of you have heard different things about what the general plan is. You know, is it the blueprint for the future, the framework for decision making? Is it the vision that we're trying to achieve? Quite honestly, it's all of the above. So what is the general plan? You know, again, it is a series of discrete elements, and they're broken down by topics. Again, we're going to go through that: land use, housing, safety. We have natural resources. We've got harbor and bay element. We've got a variety. We're going to go through that a little more in detail here in a moment. But those elements contain policies that guide the decision-making that the city does, whether it be through the Harbor Commission at the Harbor and Bay element or the Planning Commission in the land use element. It also affects how we manage the city's municipal functions as well. There's policies in there about maintaining those municipal functions. Why do we have a general plan? It's really because the state mandates it, but it's also good for the community. It helps us, you know, it guides that decision making, if you will. Bear with me here. I've got these things all turned over on so I have to look back on myself here. So why do we have it? Again, it is based on state law, but it's really what we want to do for our own community as well. So what does it do? You know, it does all those issues that I mentioned. It helps us guide those decisions on how we deal with parks, how we deal with roads, how we deal with land use, how we deal with housing, how we deal with the safety elements, how the police department functions to some degree. Obviously, there's a lot more to the police department function, but there are policies that help support those functions. Same with the fire department. We're going to be getting into a lot of new issues that were never mandated in the past. Climate change is a requirement as part of the safety element. Now, we're going to have to deal with sea level rise and a whole variety of different things there. So again, it's a compilation of policies and plans. It is the community's plan for the future. It guides those future decisions. So kind of stepping back a little bit, when did we last do this? Was 2006. There was probably a 6-year effort to get to a document in 2006. It did have increases in density and intensity of land use, more housing units and more commercial uses to support that growing community. And it did go to a vote of the electorate in 2006. Many of you probably remember that. And it did pass. And so we do envision that we're going to need to do that going forward in the future. We do have our charter that we do need to adhere to. In our general plan, there are 10 elements. Now, the state mandates 7. We have 10. We don't need to have those extra elements, but the community back in the early 2000s decided that we wanted to do some additional policy documents. So again, it was 2006, that last update. So we initiated this update in 2019, and as many of you may remember, we had a little thing called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA, and this is where the state allocated to us through SCAG, a very large number of housing units that we needed to plan for, and so that really required us to pivot a little bit, and we focused on housing and circulation, and those 2 elements actually have been done. Works. There we go. So we have an adopted housing element, and if you didn't know, it has been certified by the state of California, so that's a big accomplishment. I don't know how many cities in Orange County can say they have a certified housing element, but we're one of the very few. 13 now? Well, back when we were certified, it was less than that, but so there's 35 cities in the 30-ish cities in this, So there's a lot of cities that don't have a certified housing element, and they're working on that now. We're past that. We've also done a whole series of work on the circulation element. So a lot of the policies there have been updated to be consistent with state law. So that was adopted by council in October. So those 2 elements were pretty much done. We're not going to be reopening the housing element as we're going forward, but we have the rest of the general plan to deal with. All right. And those are the remaining elements. I'm going to turn this over to Ben Zadiba here. He's going to go through the variety of elements that we're going to be working on going forward. And again, this is going to be kind of a higher level summary. And what we'll do toward the end of the presentation is we'll start talking about how we're going to break this down into pieces and working with different subcommittees of the GPAC to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it. So with Ben, I'll take it.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's great to have such stellar attendance, especially for the first meeting. Hopefully that continues as we go to our regular meetings beyond this one. I'm going to try my best not to look behind me. Jim didn't jumble these up too bad, so let's go ahead and start. So as Jim mentioned, we had the housing element, which has been adopted and thankfully certified by HCD. We are one of 35 Orange County agencies, one of 13 and 35 Orange County agencies to have accomplished that. Very proud to say that. As far as required elements, you see them on your screen. We've got land use, safety, noise, natural resources. Notably, the Office of Planning and Research for the state requires conservation and open space, which are both part of the natural resources element. So while the state requires 7, we have 6 required elements because one of ours combines open space and conservation into one. Optional, as Jim mentioned, we have harbor and bay, historical resources, recreation, and arts and cultural. And I'll be going through each of those very briefly in the following slides. Okay. So in terms of the process, as Jim mentioned, we have had to take a parallel track to this, and it's largely driven by the state requirements for housing law. We do have to complete a land use element update for consistency with the housing element strategy and complete the rezonings that are accompanied with that. Again, the city is planning for this housing. We have to do so. The ultimate deadline is February 2025. However, we do need to plan for the Charter Section 423 vote. As you all know, green light in our charter will be required due to the increase in density of over 100 units. And then on the parallel path, this is where you all really come into play. Obviously, the land use element is something that you'll be touching, but wanted to show that we've already started that. That's in progress, and it's out of necessity. We haven't started anything with the safety element, recreation, harbor and bay, natural resources, arts and cultural, historical resources, and noise is wide open as well. So there's a lot to be done, a lot of work to be had, and we'll be talking about that again in the following slides. But I do want to emphasize again, the March 2024 Charter Section 423 vote is really what we're up against when it comes to the land use element and the rezonings. Okay, so starting with the land use element and rezonings, it really just, as it says, guides the pattern of land development. It tells you what's compatible, what should go where. It does have to be consistent internally with all the other elements. And again, as mentioned, we must rezone for by right housing. I neglected to highlight this, but we are only updating the land use element for consistency with our housing element implementation strategy. We're not updating and changing wholesale land uses elsewhere. It's only for consistency to implement the housing element.
What I want to add to that is housing. You know, the housing policy has already been set by the housing element. Okay, we're not going into the housing element and changing it. What we're doing here is we're changing the land use element to reflect those policy choices for those housing opportunity sites, which we're going to show you in a minute. And we're not really revisiting the housing policies. Now, you're going to see those amendments as part of the advisory committee meeting. You know, the consultant is working on those now, and that's probably one of the first things that you're going to see. And the policy about where these housing opportunity sites is really not open to debate because the city council has established that policy with the housing. What those policies now in the land use element say, which would support all of those housing, that's something that we want your input on. We have a timeline here. It is fairly aggressive. We are going to be doing an EIR, and we are going to be doing a traffic modeling of what all that might mean. And that will be done over this calendar year. And we do need to get to the city council toward the end of this year for adoption of this. But you will play a role in that. You will see that. You provide comments and input on that. But the policy under which that was created really isn't going to be coming back. Now, with that being said, you know, we're not considering additional commercial development at this time. You know, when you think about the number of housing units that are going to be in place, and there are thousands that are going to be in there, close to 10,000, you might think, wait, we might need to have some additional commercial development or other uses in the community to help support that growing community, and you're not wrong. This initial path, this first path is really all about housing because we've got a state mandate to get it done, and we have got a deadline for that. But that doesn't mean we can't revisit the land use element later, and there may be other things that we might want to do. And so we want to make sure everyone understands that, you know, while the housing component of the land use element is really, going to be focusing on, there may be other things in the land use element that we might want to change. Again, that will be on the table. So I don't want this whole housing discussion really to say that we're limiting our discussion to other things. We're not looking at additional commercial or industrial or institutional development at this time. Okay, I'm happy to kind of clarify that if that didn't quite.
Thanks for the additional information, Jim. That's kind of how tonight's going to go, by the way. Jim's going to provide some color commentary if I neglect to mention something, and he's given me authorization to kick him off the mic if he's taking too long. So with that, again, this slide format you see here with the considerations is what all of the forthcoming slides are going to show with the elements, and I apologize for those of you who came to the first steering committee meeting. A lot of this is going to be repetitive, so I apologize in advance. But again, as Jim said, the land use element must be updated for the reasons he stated, as well as what's in the considerations. moving forward, just showing where these rezonings are taking place. And this was all, again, decided through a very robust process with the Housing Element Update Advisory Committee. They reviewed every single site that they could get their hands on in the city, and basically identified these focus areas through community outreach fairly on in 2019 and 2020. And just real quick aside, I see pictures. We'll be posting this and sending this out to everybody, so don't feel like you need to take a picture of it unless you really want to, but just want to throw that out there. So again, these are the focus areas. Moving into what that translates to in the housing element. This is from our sites, opportunity sites inventory, which is a required component of the housing element. It's Appendix B in our document, B as in boy. You'll see here, this is the airport area. All of the pink represents an opportunity site. And again, those are all vetted by the Housing Element Update Advisory Committee at public meetings, indicating whether or not they would be feasible and ripe for potential residential redevelopment. So you'll see a map for each of these focus areas in the housing element. So as was mentioned, we are on a parallel track. We have a current consultant who's been contracted by the city to help with the circulation element update as well as the housing element update, and now they're kind of pivoting to help us with the land use element update and rezonings for implementation. So again, that has already started, but you all will be a part of that process. We plan to bring policy draft documents as well as rezoning overlays to the advisory committee for input. So that's something to look forward to. As Jim noted, we're also doing an environmental impact report and a traffic study that comes with that. So vision statement is exactly what you might envision. Business world, there's brand promises, brand statements. Here, this is really what does the community envision for its future? What is the guiding principle that will push us into the next, era? And usually a planning horizon is 20, 30, even 40 years in some cases. So it's really looking forward into the advanced future. And so the considerations, again, is the current statement something that is in alignment with how the city might have been changed since 2006 or even before when that was originally drafted? Yeah. That was Jim Campbell providing that question for the record. No, so the vision statement is something, again, that was last updated in 2006. That's obviously something that the advisory committee will chime in on as far as does it really represent what the community wants to achieve. And it's really supposed to be something, a baseline measurement where you can look back at the planning horizon and then say, did we really accomplish what we set out to accomplish? Safety element, very important element. It's actually required to be updated once we amend two general plan elements. So we will be required to update the safety element. We obviously should anyway with all of the housing units that are being planned for. But this is really important because it does address climate change, namely sea level rise. I think we've seen a lot of safety hazards with the rains, maybe not as much as we thought in Newport Beach, thankfully. But it is something that comes to the top of priorities as far as kind of updating is concerned. And again, you'll see it talks to climate change, sea level rise, flooding, wildfire, another important one. And then I do want to note it aligns with the local hazard mitigation plan. So that is something that will be prepared alongside the safety element and kind of help guide that process. Throughout these slides, you'll also see partnership opportunities where we've got obviously experts, as Nancy touched upon. We'll be inviting people from outside of the city as well as people in other departments inside the city. Our emergency services personnel, fire marshal, people who are very involved in the day-to-day with that would be very helpful to kind of lean on for their expertise. But we'll also have consultants and other experts talking to the subcommittees and the advisory committee to help guide any changes to those goals and policies.
Topics that we really need to get into. When you think of climate change, it's all of the above, and everyone is saying, well, sea level rise is the most important. Well, it really is because we have a low-lying harbor area, right? But when you think of climate change, our document has to deal with it in all of its facets as it relates to safety. So we have a wildland fire interface. We've got a harbor. We've obviously experienced a fair amount of rain recently, and I think maybe the rain will be a little bit more variable. And so we will be engaging consultants to try help us understand what the best available science is. What does all that really mean, and how do we plan for that? I think we kind of have a good idea about what to do with the harbor in terms of changing our development standards to kind of raise properties, raise bulkheads, create other measures on the beaches to address the rising seas. How we plan for the wildland fire interface, that's also a very important thing. How we deal with drainage for future variability and flooding, we need to try to do our best to understand what that is and plan for it. So I want to say this is probably the one element that needs a lot of, right now it's a very good element. I would say that it's not as bad as you think it is, but there's a lot in here for us to go over. So this is probably one of the large areas that will take.
Thank you, Jim. So noise element, again, a lot of these titles are pretty self-explanatory as far as what their purpose is. But notably with the noise element, obviously we've got the airport area, John Wayne Airport, the noise that comes therein and the ambient noise it creates. Specifically, you'll see in the considerations, and you actually saw in that map, if I can go back. So as you can see, there are new sites planned in the airport area as identified again by the Housing Element Update Advisory Committee. Notably, the ones that are closer to the airport are actually within a higher noise zone. And as you'll see in the considerations again, there's currently a prohibition on housing in the 65 to 70 decibel areas, CNEL, which must be removed to allow housing in that heightened sensitivity area, subject to some mitigation measures such as construction standards that are better sound attenuation and better, more thoughtful designs. So again, governs noise in the community, and then I think there's a special focus on the airport area. Arts and cultural, here we just have a strong note to partner with the city's Arts Commission to discuss and refresh the goals and policies. That's one that, there isn't a lot in terms of goals and policies that are detailed, and maybe it is time for a refresh if there are renewed vision for arts and cultural components in the community. Obviously, since this general plan has come in place, we have things like the Civic Center structures that get cycled out, and it's one of the best things to do is walk through that and view all the art. So maybe there are some new policies to encourage public art installations, whatever you might decide to change. I'd say Harbor and Bay is another important one that's probably near and dear to a lot of people in the city and in the community. I do note here that the goals and policies with the Harbor and Bay element as well as the content might overlap some with the safety element, because obviously with sea level rise, there are standards in the Harbor and Bay element, or policies rather, that would talk to that, and maybe it's required to make those consistent, so there is some overlap there to be considered. Also, we have our harbor commissions, so we should definitely leverage their knowledge and experience in the community to see what they maybe envision. But again, I'm sure some of you are boaters and avid watermen and waterwomen, so it'd be great to hear what you have to say on that one. Historical resources element, this is another one that doesn't have a ton of content in the general plan, but it does refer to several properties that are notable, such as the Balboa Inn, the Pavilion. There are a few other that are listed in there as potential historic structures. Maybe time to refresh that one as well. So here we just have a note that you can partner with local historical societies. There may be other people and groups to partner with to kind of get some expertise and their vision for how we could better preserve historical structures or potentially historical structures in the community. Natural resources element, I think that's another big one, although it's more towards the end of the presentation here. As I said, it does entail conservation and open space, which are two required elements by the state. Another thing that's notable here, it talks to basically everything that's in the natural environment and how we deal with that with development and preserve it conservation. You'll see in the considerations, we do note here about enhanced sustainability practices, which could be talked about within the natural resources element. I think it does touch on that today, but it could also be enhanced to include more modern day practices when it comes to sustainability. That's a big topic for the day. Recreation element, again, self-explanatory what that is. Really just talks to the city's park programming. One interesting consideration there is with all of the planning for new housing units, we need to go back and revisit acreage per people and look at what is the appropriate acreage given all the new housing units that we're planning for. What are the city's current needs and how do we move forward to make sure we're addressing all those needs. So that concludes an overview of the elements. The last thing I'm going to touch on here is just a timeline. And I think at the pleasure of Chair Gardner, maybe we open it up after that for public comment. So again, parallel processing, this is not a perfect schedule. There's not all the dates that we would expect on a schedule. It's more of a timeline just showing a 1,000-foot aerial of what we're dealing with. So again, the key is the March 2024 Charter Section 423 vote that we're up against. In order to get that on the ballot, we do need to wrap up our work on the land use element, the EIR, and the rezonings by the end of this year. So it's a pretty heavy lift, and that's where we'll need your help to weigh in on policies and goals as well as the overlay standards. And again, here is probably where you might have more fun, as Nancy suggested you do. Looking at all of the remaining elements, there's really no end timeline for that. We're looking at late 2024, early 2025, but there's nothing really driving that has to be done now. Again, the parallel processing is intended to show you we do have a hard stop for the land use element and rezoning, which is why that's more pressing. Not to say more important. I know some of these are more important to some of you, but it is something that we are up against. We need to deal with that. But the remaining elements, we can take as much time as you all want. Yes, Jim.
And went through the different elements. He spoke to that there are some overlaps with other elements. I think what you're going to find is that all of these elements work together. And they all influence one another. The natural resources element have policies in there that affect development and how we deal with development today that you might think is all regulated by the land use element. Well, it's regulated by both. It's also regulated by the housing element. It's also regulated by the noise element. It's also regulated by the safety element. And so what I'm trying to get across to you is that all these elements work together and they are mutually kind of intertwined, if you will. One of the things we're going to be talking about here momentarily is trying to break this down into digestible pieces so that we can work on it in different groups. But again, all of this fits together in one larger package, and so I think having a broad familiarity with all of these elements is going to be important, even if you are kind of focusing on land use or you're focusing in on the safety element. They all interrelate back to one another, and so the more that you kind of understand the full scope of all these elements, I think it'll help you as you go through with working on a specific element.
That concludes your General Plan 101. So, Chair Gardner.
Are there any specific questions on this right now? Yes, uh-huh. As I recall, it came out of the committee itself and said, gee, this is something of interest. And do you remember that, Jim?
Yeah, optional elements came out because of the community wanting these elements to exist. The folks in the community who were vested in the harbor, They wanted a harbor element. And they wanted those policies that relate to the harbor because it's an important feature. They wanted it to be elevated to a whole element of the general plan. And so again, it was community driven. All of it was community driven.
Anything else? Dennis?
A lot of reference was made how the different elements work together, but there's also the aspect that the elements can't be in conflict with each other. So maybe now or at some point touch on how those resolutions might take place. Otherwise, one element that conflicts with something. Got to win, somebody's got to lose. So I'd like to know a little more about that.
Actually, a very good question. Right now, our general plan is a little bit inconsistent internally. And the example is the housing element. We have a housing element policy, where we've got all these housing opportunity sites. Ben showed the graphic of just the airport area. Well, we have a map like that for the entire community. If you haven't seen it, it's online. It's a very good read. But it does not match what the land use element says. And so to eliminate that conflict, we are going through amending the land use element to provide policies that support all of those all those sites that you see in the housing element and all the policies of the housing element. So we're going to be amending in the airport area, there are policies that need to be probably eliminated and policies that need to be changed, and there may need to be new policies to support housing on the sites that you saw, plus housing on the sites that are already allowed. And obviously we've seen some of those projects come forward, but how do we reflect we need to amend that land use element. Now, as we go forward and we're looking at all the elements collectively at this point going forward, we're going to have to identify with the policies that are coming out of the different subcommittees and different elements, and we're going to have to read across the entire general plan to make sure there are no conflicts. We can't create a policy in one document then all of a sudden doesn't even allow a land use to be achieved that's in the land use element. And so they all have to work together.
I would say the short answer is the committee. That's where it will be resolved. If the subcommittee from the safety element has something that for some reason conflicts, then you all are going to have to discuss it and work out it. I mean, some of it is going to be technical. I mean, that's where staff will take the lead probably in saying, well, this is a conflict. But if you have actual conflicts between the elements, that will be up to you to be a deliberative body, to make compromises, which we'll see. Paul?
Very good question, Mr. Watkins. Appreciate that. So you're correct. The state does now require an environmental justice element or policies to be weaved throughout the general plan. Prior discussion and direction from council has been to put them in policies, but obviously that was a long time ago when it was first broached and first became part of the state's guidelines for general plan. I would say that the committees have discretion to make a recommendation on something like that, but the current approach has been to include environmental justice policies within each element.
That's the same sustainability. Do we want a sustainability element, or do we want to have them woven through? Charles?
I was going to ask that very thing. Does this group have the ability to recommend or to establish additional elements? Second question, does any...
I don't remember us doing that.
Yeah, the general plan isn't going to have to go to the Coastal Commission. Now, there may be policies in the general plan that we put forward that might end up being an amendment to our local coastal program.
That would be it, yeah.
So it's actually it's a very good question. Our land use element has a companion policy document called the Coastal Land Use Plan, and the land use is actually all aligned, and the policies are very much in alignment. They're not perfectly aligned, but one document goes to the Coastal Commission, and so if we make a lot of changes in a variety of things, yes, there may be policies that have to go to the Coastal Commission separately as part of our local coastal program.
Yeah, we didn't have an LCP the last time.
We did not, and so it was actually a lot easier. This gets
Yeah.
way more complicated as a result.
The state is always presenting us with a new challenge. Any other questions or comments? All right, this next part is selection of a general plan advisory committee chair and vice chair. This is a role for the steering committee. I would like to suggest, if any of you are ever on the city council, that you do not make 3-member brown hat committees, because it's very awkward to pick out people in the middle of a large group of other people. So what we are proposing tonight is you're going to be asked to sign up, and it's not in concrete, there's flexibility, but asked to sign up for at least one committee, one element that you think you'd be interested in. And I'm asking you also at the time that if you think you'd like to serve as chair or vice chair, to also let us know that so that we can take time and look at your resumes in private, not the three of us in private, but each of us privately. We're very, very good about the Brown Act. And come back at the next meeting with a recommendation. The role of the chair is not necessarily a lot more time-consuming. I don't think as chair you have to go to every subcommittee meeting or anything. The main role of the chair is to run the meeting. And as you can see, these are going to be large meetings. They're going to have usually 30 people plus the public. And if you have never run a committee, or particularly a public committee, I would suggest maybe that you hold off and not apply for this one. And don't go for a 30-person committee your very first time out of the chute. But if you are interested, please do sign up, and we will resolve this at the next meeting, when we will also, what we're going to do as a steering committee, we're going to look at all of your applications for the subcommittees. We want to be sure, one, that we, hold on a minute, we want to make sure that, for one thing, we have enough people. We don't want 30 people in one committee and none on the other. And we want to be sure that we're going to keep these under the Brown Act minimum so that you can get off and just do your thing and then bring your ideas back, and that's where they'll be discussed in public. Did you list the vision statement? Okay, all right. There should be, well, I'll get your question in a moment, but just also, there needs to be, write down if you're interested, a subcommittee for the vision statement. This is a real difficult task, writing a vision statement. Perhaps you just have to edit this one, but we spent...
There's no noise.
Okay, all right. So write in noise and safety if that's what you... Noise or safety. I guess they left... How can you lose those? Okay. All right, that's good. All right, so we will then, the steering committee will look at the various committees, and if we see that there are too many in one committee, what we will do is, again, pull out the resumes, make sure we have a good diversity of perspectives for each committee. So then that's what we will do in our next meeting. We will announce those. And again, embarrass ourselves trying not to offend anybody as we make choices of people. All right? And so that's basically... Yeah. Oh, the timing and frequency. All right. Proposals from, are we meeting monthly? Yeah, for the first time. We'd like to have, we're not going to meet every 2 weeks, okay? Or you guys aren't. But we would like to get the committees and everything rolling. So we will probably meet in 2 weeks. It'll be another joint meeting. And then we will break off and have our regular meetings. And you will not be meeting in this room after the next joint meeting. This is not a setup for chatting about, exchanging ideas really easily. So whether it'll be in the community room or not will depend. Now, have we decided, did you say you wanted the committee to decide whether they wanted it, how they wanted it publicized? I mean, in terms of airing, or is that something that the council has weighed in on?
Yeah, so presently the meeting is being video recorded. It does get posted online afterwards. We are not live streaming this. In practice, we generally only do that for Planning Commission and City Council. So it has not been our practice to live stream this sort of a meeting, but obviously it's up for discussion.
Yeah. That to me makes sense, as long as you have access to it. Since it's not a call-in, it's not a Zoom-type meeting, the fact that you can't tune in live doesn't matter because you couldn't comment anyway unless you were here. But any other thoughts on that? Okay, so you'll send out an email to everybody as far as the timing of the next one? Okay.
I can talk.
All right.
Yeah, so I'm email will follow with consider what you have in your hand a draft. You can start thinking about what you want to sign up for. We'll send you an emailed copy that actually includes the vision statement, as well as the safety element and the noise element, which were inadvertently excluded by myself, so I apologize. And then also on that note, just know that I'm kind of your liaison. Jim is technically your liaison too, but I'm a little more available. So definitely reach out to me if you have any questions. And again, we'll get that email out to you shortly after this meeting. Yes, February 1st is the date we were shooting for the next joint meeting. And we'll check, yes. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Black.
Question that's also what you mentioned earlier that
I just remember we did it. I don't really remember how we did it.
Yeah, it's so we ended up doing a series of different community meetings, and so when these new elements that were envisioned, there was some consensus at these larger community meeting events. At the end of the day, it was the steering committee of the day. There was actually a general plan update committee, and then there was a general plan advisory committee. And so the update committee,
It was council, wasn't it?
well, it was a smaller committee. I think it was about 8 people, and there were council members on that. And so what they ended up doing they played the role that the steering committee is playing right now. And they would then do check-ins with the city council on big themes. So if we suggested, to do a sustainability element, okay, if that is indeed what the General Plan Advisory Committee would like to do, then I would think that would be a role for the steering committee to report to the city council, get their buy-in before we go too far,
Right.
and then we go from there.
Okay, so here, it fits right in, it's a good point. It fits into our next agenda item. Board, committee, commission announcements, or matters which they would like to be placed on a future agenda. So if you have something like that you want to bring up, we can put it on the agenda for the next meeting. The steering committee can consider it at that time. So do you have something?
yeah, I would love to put it on. I think
Okay,
other forward-looking.
all right, so we will put that on the agenda. Anything else? Yes? Well, I think at this point we were thinking that that would happen when the subcommittee brings the material back to the advisory committee at large. That's when the public discussion would take place, because they would be learning it, the rest of the committee would be learning it at the same time as the general public. So we'll at least start that way and see how it works. Let's put that on the agenda as well. Let's let the advisory committee decide whether you want to have those open meetings or whether you think it's easier to do it. So that's another agenda item. Mm-hmm. Anything else? Yes, Larry. How was it done last time? We didn't. I think the only subcommittee I can remember was the vision statement. I think we tended to be. We just talked about it a lot. That's why it took 6 years. We didn't have subcommittees. Anything else? Oh, yes, uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and that's, hopefully we will get our consultants on board for our outreach, and they can help us with that as far as an overall plan. We don't have a consultant in place for that right yet, but we are working on it.
We don't. And we don't have a consultant to assist us at this time. And part of that consultant contract will be an outreach component, that will involve websites and trying to reach out into the community to get additional at every stage of the game. So when we have drafts, we don't want to make sure we get them. I notice every one of these broader meetings where we're taking bigger topics to the community to get for deliberations. That component is coming. I'm sorry, we just don't have that consultant on board at this point in time, but there will be.
All right, anything else for Lynn? Yeah.
They all will. And so.
Wait for the email. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As Ben said, it's a draft, and we'll update it so it's got everything on there so that you can.
All right. Anything else? Any future agenda? Dennis?
I want to know where non-governmental organizations fit in. So, I actually attended Spawn a couple years ago, did a series of general plan workshops, and back.
I don't remember going to Spawn 10 times, but
Well,
I know I went to a couple meetings.
we had them up to the fire station.
We would have converted you by then.
Well, but my
How do you know
question,
you haven't converted me already?
my question is, where do you see a place for NGOs? And if so, how, don't step on each other or that type of thing? Where's the place in?
Well, it seems to me that an NGO in this situation is like an individual. I mean, representatives can come and speak and do the representation. I mean, obviously, I'm Joe Blow, and I represent this NGO, which has a membership in our community of 300 people, and this is what we feel the policy should be.
So it might, like a residents association, homeowners might come and address.
I see no reason why not. I think I am assuming that the advisory committee would like to hear from a group like that. Oh, that's representing a lot of people in Corona Del Mar. Great, I want to know what they feel. Nancy? I'm assuming that many people, because of just their workload and everything, will say, I like to do one committee and give it my all. But there'll be others who say, oh, no, I just can't choose. I have to do 2 or 3. I can't imagine anybody being on all of them. I mean, I think that would be a big lift. But yeah, I mean, I don't see, you don't need to say just, okay, I have to pick one out of all of these great things I want to get involved in.
Nancy, if I may. Our hope is to get 8 to 10 people on each one of these committees. We can't get more than 15, which would be a quorum of the GPAC. But I also want to let everyone know that, while we're looking to get, 8 to 10 people to kind of focus in on, say, the Harbor and Bay element, they're going to be delving in deeply into that. At the end of the day, there's going to be some work product, and there's going to be questions that are raised at that subcommittee level. Well, guess where the subcommittee goes to report to? That's all of you. And so then they come forward and they provide a report, and then we'll help facilitate that narrative and discussion. And they may be questions that they want answered, input on for the entire GPAC. And so you're all going to be a part of that. And that's why, some of these elements, they do go across different elements. That's where we'll be seeking input for all of you on safety, even though you're not on the safety element. You may be on the land use element, but there's going to be questions that come up. What do we do about this? And you'll be part of that narrative.
Anything else?
One of the things we need to do to kind of help facilitate this is there's a couple things. Just maybe we'll call this housekeeping here. I believe everyone has taken the oath of office from the city clerks. I believe everyone has. So if you haven't, you need to do that. You need to get in front of the city clerk and make that happen. And what we will end up doing is once obviously that's accomplished, we need to issue you a city email address. Okay? And that's how we're going to be communicating with you folks. That's how we're going to send out agendas. That's how we're going to communicate with the subcommittees as well. We'll create a mailing list for the subcommittee, and we'll be sending you agendas and sending you materials to review, and then scheduling those meetings. And so we need all of that to be orchestrated. So that's a little bit of work on our IT department, but help me out here, Ben.
Yeah, so all of the email addresses have already been created. It's just a matter of you all logging in, and sometimes that can be a challenge, I know. So if you do need assistance, please reach out to me. I unfortunately didn't bring my cards, but I can go grab some, and I'm happy to help assist you in setting that up and accessing it on your phone or however you'd like to get to it.
So you'll be sending will you be sending the new committee thing out on their newportbeachca.gov emails? So he's sending it out tonight. So if you don't see it in the next couple of days on the thing, the contact Ben or IT, because I know, Philip, you had yours and you missed a meeting because you never even got the connection. And so if don't hear from us, then let us know, because we need to get that cleared up. All right? Charles?
On the oath of office, you can't just show up.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, just give the city clerk a call if you haven't done that yet, and then they'll
Yeah. All right. Anything else? All right, then. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Nancy?